All right, I want to welcome all of you to our PolarConnect event. We're really excited today to be having the research team with Alison that was doing some work up in Alaska. She's going to be talking about what they did looking at permafrost and the impacts on the surrounding communities. Today is February 28th, 2019. For today's PolarConnect event, I'm Janet Warburton, and Judy Fonstock and I will be hosting this event from Arcus. A few things before we get going to turn this over to Alison and the team. Today's event will be through the Adobe Connect. And we normally have a PowerPoint, but today we have a PDF version versus a PowerPoint, so it shows up on your screen a little bit differently. If you are in a classroom or have a lot of background noise, we'd like you to mute your microphones so that we don't pick up the sounds coming from your classrooms and so forth. To mute your microphones, just click on the little microphone at the top of the screen and put a text through it. And I am hearing somebody, not sure, it could be coming from Alison's background. Do you have background noise in your world there, Alison?
No, not really.
Okay, oh yeah, I see it. I'm going to mute somebody there. Okay, there we go. All right, so a little bit about our platform. There is going to be the presentation showing up in the middle. Down at the bottom of the screen, you will see that we have a public chat area. This is a great spot for introducing yourself and telling us where you're coming and joining from and how many students you have. Today's webcam will be focused on the research team and Alison, and so we won't get to see all of your faces, but as we go along here, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat area, and we will relay those to the team. That's actually the next little bit is for you to introduce yourself so we know where you're coming from. So the reason why we're hosting this event today is part of the PolarTREC program, Teachers and Researchers Exploring and Collaborating. And we are funded by the National Science Foundation through an award through the Office of Polar Programs. We've been hosting and administrating PolarTREC for over a decade now, and we've had teachers and informal science educators like Alison work with researchers like Sasha and Santos and travel out to the polar regions, either the Arctic or the Antarctic, so that they can get hands-on experiences and work with the research team. So you'll hear more about Alison's experience here today and what her team focused on. As we go through this presentation, as I mentioned earlier, please post your questions in the chat box. If we have time at the end, we'll do live questions or just continue on with responding to questions in the chat area. This event is being archived, and we'll share it through email to everyone that registered, as well as posted on the website. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Alison and the team to try to introduce themselves to all of us. We'll check out the sound situation. Again, presenters, just mute your audio when you are not talking so we can reduce feedback. And Alison, you either can scroll through the pictures yourself, the PDF, or tell us to do it, whatever works for you.
Okay, well, we can introduce ourselves real quick, and then Sasha and Santos are going to present about the research, and then I'll talk about my experience in the field and my work. So real quick, hi everybody, my name is Alison. I do research and development for exhibits at a science museum in Portland, Oregon, so I'll talk a little bit more about what that means later in the presentation. But I had a fantastic opportunity to go out into the field with permafrost researchers who you're about to meet. And yeah, I think that's all I want to say right now. So maybe Sasha and Santos, you can.
Hello, I'm Alexander Holodov, also known as Sasha, and I'm research faculty at Geophysical Institute, University of Alaska, Fairbanks. I do broad variety of permafrost study, and this project actually was very interesting for me because it was first time I did not just environmental studies, but it was big social component.
And this is Santos Tana. I am also at the University of Alaska, Fairbanks. I study permafrost with a focus more on remote sensing application and mapping and ground temperature modeling. So with that, I think I will ask Sasha to get started with his talk.
So this project was launched actually in 2014 when two ladies from Telida Village Council came to our lab and asked us to help them to establish some kind of to help them to start a permafrost studies around the village of Telida. And we submitted proposal to NSF and got funded from the first try, which I was a little bit surprised. But I also was kind of concerned when we just started this project because it was funded through the social studies. And we have to, as I mentioned earlier, we have to include kind of social component. So we decided the idea of this project should be to see what, to find out what people's real concerns about climate change around the communities, and if we can see some connection with, is it different in continuous and discontinuous permafrost zone. And we started with the villages of Nikolai and Telida, the typical communities of discontinuous permafrost zone of interior Alaska. And so it were two main directions of this project. First, it's to collect some social information like traditional knowledge, but we also collected, we conducted a community survey to figure out what do people know about climate change and what they can do they know anything about permafrost and what they are concerned about. And what did we find? That yes, people are aware about climate change. They can observe some changes around communities. And they were concerned mostly about two problems. First is a decreasing of berry productivity, and second is late freeze up of water bodies like wetlands, rivers, lakes. So both of these problems are not directly but somehow related to permafrost. And we decided what we have to establish observation network around villages and train local people so they our local partners, they can when project will be over, then they can conduct this observation by themselves. And the idea was we asked them to help us to identify areas they are most interested about, the information about. And so our idea was what this data, people can living in Telida and Nikolai, they can use this data for better and more safe planning of land use activity. So we established. So right now we have 13 observation points around Telida village and 7 more at Nikolai. And these observation points cover both undisturbed area to see the natural trend, natural background, and some identify some kind of human activity like tree cutting on the permafrost temperature dynamics. Okay. Here you can see the map of our observation sites at Telida village. You see we identified two areas. The upper one is this one. The upper one is B area. It's undisturbed. There's a transect across the Telida hill, and A area is the area around the village, so it's more subjected to human activity. And you can see even on these pictures what we tried from the very beginning. So we involved people in the process of site selection, but we also provided training for them to make them convenient to work with equipment we use. Okay, here you can see some data. It's dynamics of air temperature and ground surface temperature. And what you can see, what in 2000, at the end of 2016, beginning of 2017, so we had a first year of observation. So mean annual air temperature was slightly below the freezing point, so it was minus 2.3 degrees Celsius. But the main annual temperature at the ground surface is already above freezing point, and it means what permafrost shouldn't exist in this area, in according to conditional ground surface. But it is still here, and it's only exists because of protecting effect of ecosystem. So any kind of land use associated with tree cutting or disturbance of organic layer will initiate degradation of permafrost. Okay. Here you can see the mean annual temperature of the ground surface across our stations at Telida village, and you see what two of our, unfortunately from two sites, we didn't have good data because of wildlife. So these two stations were damaged with bears. So it means working with communities, you need to establish better good relationship not only with community members but with animals living around as well. Okay, here you can see what I'm
getting some feedback.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, it's better now. So what did we find? There is a very good correlation of ecosystem of ground temperature. So here on this slide you can see the mean annual ground temperature at all of our sites, and you see what warmest sites are associated with the place subjected to some disturbance. It might be fire, forest fires, or human activity like tree cutting. And undisturbed areas are warmest, are coldest. And we also, after first year of our studies, we decided to extend our observation and research program, include a little bit more ecological studies. So we collected tree cores, we did some forest studies, because forest is a very crucial thing for these communities. It plays very important role in the life of these rural communities. So we try to bring it more close to the thing which might be more interesting to people, and we saw a positive feedback. We saw what people were really curious about, to get some new knowledge, to do something new. I actually even hope might be sometimes some of people who used to work with us, they will be able to apply this knowledge and get better opportunities on labor's market. I know what Forestry Service now recruit more and more local people to do forest survey. So a week ago, a couple of weeks ago, I attended the meeting in Anchorage, Alaska Forum on Environment, and it was a very interesting session about forest activity, forest and communities. And you see the digits, the upper part of this plot, it's a forest stand age, and we found what the age of forest is also kind of indicator of permafrost stability. Up to, if area recovering after wildfires, it usually goes through shrubland, through deciduous forest, to regular boreal coniferous forest. And up to the forest age 100 years, we see a positive correlation. So the older forest is, the colder permafrost is. After 100 years, not a big difference. But one of the ideas of this slide is to show what if area is subjected to disturbance associated with deforestation or soil disturbance, so that it will affect the permafrost degradation. And here is another picture of ground temperature dynamics at the bottom of active layer. You can see what we have two types of active layer at seasonally thawed and cold sites, and seasonally frozen and warm sites. And so the complete freezing. So on this slide, I thought to show what complete freezing of seasonally thawed layer happens. Usually at the colder side, it happens at the beginning, even very fast at the beginning of winter, sometimes in December, and in warmer side, the unfrozen layer can exist up to the end of middle or end of spring, and complete thawing of seasonally frozen layer happens at the middle or at the end of summer. And of course, after 2 years of observations, we can see what the ground temperature is really variable from. It's a indicator which is really very variable from year to year. For example, the previous winter was not super warm in terms of air temperature, but it was a lot of snow, and you can see what even colder side was a little bit warmer last year than the year before. One of the very important things working with people from communities who very often do not have any extra skills in operation of some kind of complicated equipment, you should pick good tools people can learn really fast how to use. And we have very good experience to work with this on-set of computers, data loggers and sensors. It's very easy to operate, and this equipment provides good quality of data. And as I told, it's very user-friendly interface, so if people know how to type text in a Microsoft Word or can use an internet browser, they can learn how to use this program. So, and kind of conclusion of monitoring part, what sustainable monitoring of not only ground temperature. My idea is what we have to think about more research program in this area, and use this ground temperature observation network as a background for more research project aimed on ecological studies. As I told, forest is very important for this community, so probably, and permafrost is very important for existence of this ecosystem. So we need to study how this ecosystem responds to the climate change. So it's not an ultimate solution of all humans' problem in these rural communities, but it's a very powerful tool which can help make rural communities more resilient in front of environmental changes. And main problem we understood working on this project is there is a big problem with mechanisms, how we can bring our scientific results, how we can implement our data and our activity to real community needs. So we just need to think towards the exact mechanisms, how we can help people with our activity. Thank you.
This is
Thank you. Yeah, there were some questions that came up, and I was wondering before Santos responds to them. If you can, I'm going to mute you, Santos. There you go. That way you can hear me ask the questions. So the question I have for you guys is, can you tell us and give our audience a little bit of a perspective about the two villages? And I know you're kind of going to go into that a little bit, but most of the people that have joined today are not familiar with Alaska, and they aren't familiar with the rural communities that you're working with. So can you kind of give us a picture about what the communities are like, where they're a little bit located, and you keep mentioning that the permafrost is important to them, and why is it so important to them? So maybe just give us a little bit of background before you go into the next bit.
Okay, so we are talking now about two communities, but if you are talking about villages, in matter of fact, both of these tribes now live in Nikolai. Nikolai is a small village. It's about 100 people live there. As far as I understand, I do not have very broad experience to visit all these rural communities in interior Alaska, but it looks it's kind of pretty typical. Most of people who live there follow traditional lifestyle, subsistence lifestyle. They depend a lot on fishing and hunting. Limited opportunities for employment, so most of men in this village are seasonally employed as firefighters. So pretty much only a few people who work for village council or for school district have kind of sustainable income source. So that means people really depends on natural condition around. And permafrost plays very important role in evolution of ecosystem here, because if permafrost will thaw there, so it might be two consequences. First, if we have really in some areas where we have really ice-rich permafrost, it might initiate development of wetlands or new lakes formation, which will make the problem with transportation even stronger. People were complaining about. Second possible way how permafrost degradation might affect this area, it is increasing of drainage conditions, so it will go to disappearing of lakes, which limits people's fishing ability, or just dryness of drought of the area, which will increase risk of wildfires. So.
Okay. Very quickly, how many people are in the communities that are part of your study, and are both men and women involved in the project?
12 people. Some of them were with us all times we go outside, like 2 or 3 people, but mostly it's like a couple times participants. And what I'm really glad about is what we had at least one young man who just graduated school and one high school student. So we try to involve young people more. And we also every time we visited Nikolai, we try to communicate with school, providing some lecture, bring them to our research site, explaining them what we are doing, why it might be important, what do we see. And finally, last summer we could see what, the kids remember something. They started to answer the questions very right way, and they understood what we are doing and why it might be important for the their community. Do you want to tell something?
So I think that was good. So yes, so we included about 10 or so people over the last 3 years. That included 2 Native women, and then 2 high schoolers, and also the chief of Telida village has been very supportive of this project and has been part of our field team every time that we went down there. We did provide training to all the members who participated in the field work, and hands-on training about the equipment, how we install, how does the instrument work, and how to connect the sensor with a laptop, and how to download data. So they pretty much all of them can go out there with a laptop and download data from all the stations. Yes, and all the participants were paid. Whoever actually helped with this project, especially with the fieldwork and anything related to the fieldwork logistically, they were all paid.
So about payment, they are paid, of course, when project is funded. When it's done, it will be more like a volunteer activity, and it is actually part of a bigger problem. I know it is a kind of very important thing when people work with in citizen science area or this community-based studies, how to keep people motivated after. So obviously when project is on, they have money, they are motivated. When it's over, we need to make sure they understand importance of this data, of the information they collect for the community, to keep them motivated to continue this activity.
Okay, so
all right.
Okay, this is Santos Tana. So I think I'm going to quickly talk a little bit about the permafrost mapping and modeling component of the project. What you see in front of you is the area that we actually picked for modeling permafrost distribution. So this is a 10-mile by 10-mile area. Village is at the center. The red star is actually, that's where the Telida village is. And the inset map on the top left actually shows, the green box inside Alaska is the Upper Kuskokwim region, and then there are 4 different communities in that Upper Kuskokwim region. We are working with 2 of them. We are working with Nikolai and Telida. And right now, what you'll see now is mostly the work related to the Telida village. So this map that you see right now shows the location of our stations. So we have 13 stations that we install as part of this project. And on the top northwest side is the station. That's actually a long-term monitoring, climate monitoring station. And the temperature data that Sasha showed actually is from some of these stations. This is a summary of field data that we collected around Telida village, and what we realized that there are 5 major land cover types present within the area. So we divided the area into 5 different land cover types, and on the table actually the second column shows the percent cover of each land cover type, and open spruce, which is actually kind of more related with permafrost, is the most dominant land cover type, close to 38% of that 100 square mile area. And Ericaceae shrub, which is mostly the lowland shrub like blueberry, cloudberry, those kind of small plants that cover the lowest percent of the study area, about 1.4%. The third column, I'm showing the thaw depth in these different land cover types. This is for actually 2017 summer. And in the fourth column, I have temperature. So these temperature data are from the stations that we installed. This is for 1 year. And what we see is that looking at the temperature, you can tell that open spruce and Ericaceae shrub, these are the 2 land cover types that tend to have permafrost, near surface permafrost, whereas closed spruce land cover type, in some areas we do find permafrost, whereas in others we don't. So it's a kind of, the permafrost is more patchy in that land cover type. The other 2 land cover types, we don't see any permafrost. The temperature below the seasonal freeze thaw layer, or about a meter depth, is 1.5 degrees centigrade, close to 2 degrees centigrade. Snow depth, we collected snow depth. This is 2017 spring, and snow depth doesn't vary too much across the different land cover type. Snow density do actually, so the minimum density that we saw is 0.14 gram per cubic centimeter, and the maximum is up to 0.2 gram per cubic centimeter. So there is some variation in snow density. We used all this information when we want to model permafrost. So I'm going to say a little bit about that. So the first thing we need is a land cover map for the study area, and this is a PlanetScope image, and this has the PlanetScope scenes have 10 bands: blue, green, red, and near-infrared. We are using a scene from 6 August 2017 for land cover mapping, and the pixel size is about 4 meters. So from that PlanetScope scene, we actually created a land cover map, and we mapped the land cover using the 5 land cover classes that I showed in the table. So you can also see the legend there, the color, and kind of get an idea. The open spruce is the most dominant land cover type, of about like 38% of the area. We did accuracy analysis of this land cover map, and it comes out like about 86% accurate based on the ground data that we have. The next step is about to use that the ground temperature information as well as the land cover map, bring it in the model, and talk about and actually do the modeling. The model that we are using is called an equilibrium model, so it looks at the overall temperature at an annual scale, not finer than that. So the annual scale is that's the finest time scale that we are using. And we need to run the model, we need climate, so air temperature and precipitation data for our study area. And we are using a composite of 5 global climate models an RCP 8.5 scenario. So that's the scenario with high greenhouse gas emission scenario. The data is available from Scenario Network for Alaska and Arctic Planning. So it's a office here at University of Alaska Fairbanks, and they produce different variety of climate data for different applications. So we are using one of their data set, and we do plan to run it for different scenarios and different time scale. That's going to be later. So we need, as an input to this model, we need a land cover map so that we know what the land cover is at a given pixel. We use that to assign any kind of organic layer thickness and as well as some thermal properties for the organic layer, because we went and surveyed some of the soil types, so we know what the soil looks like in these different land cover types, and then we use that information to assign thermal properties for soil, heat capacity, conductivity, and water content. These three are the key when we want to do temperature modeling. We also need the snow information because snow sits on the top of this land cover for almost 5 to 6 months of the year. So we do have to take into account the effect of snow on ground temperature. So we also use snow thickness and density for modeling. And when we run the data through the model, we actually get temperature maps for the surface as well as temperature map for a depth below the seasonal freeze-thaw layer. And the map that you are seeing is actually now the model ground temperature map at the bottom of seasonal freeze-thaw layer. And we see that at 39% of the study area has negative temperature at the bottom of seasonal freeze-thaw layer at the annual scale. That means that 39% of the area have near surface permafrost. And the temperature actually range from from 0 to about -1 C. The permafrost is actually pretty warm. And we looked at the overall active layer thickness, which is usually within 1.5 meters. So the blue areas are areas with permafrost, whereas the red areas and red and yellow are areas with no permafrost. And then you can look at the scale. So it's from -0.9 to +0.8. This gives you an idea what's the temperature at the annual scale at the different pixel. So in summary, permafrost distribution is sporadic because if the permafrost is present at less than 50% of a given area, then it's called sporadic. So we found 39% of the area has permafrost. That means it comes under sporadic class, and also it's pretty warm. Permafrost is actually -1 or warmer wherever it is present, and we found that it's usually present under 2 different land cover class: open spruce and shrub land cover class, and patchy under closed spruce land cover class. So with that, I will stop, and I'll be happy to answer any question, or if you want Alison to go ahead and do the Q&A later, that's also fine.
Okay, thank you, Santos. So there was a question that came along. Somebody wanted to know if permafrost burns. And then we'll turn it over to Alison as well.
It is also under at least a meter of dirt. So when there is a forest fire, it does have an immediate impact on ground temperature. So if there is a fire over an area that has permafrost, then because of the fire and change in land cover, because before you had a green land cover, now fire happened and you have a darker burned logs, then that changes the albedo as well. So there are a lot of research out there that has looked at the effect of fire on permafrost. And what I know is that immediately after fire, yeah, you do see the increase in ground temperature and some thawing of permafrost. But depending on the severity, if the fire is not that severe, mostly it's burned down the trees, but didn't burn down the surface organic, which is like, the moss cover, then that fire will have a very minimum impact on permafrost. But if the fire was extremely severe and it kind of burned down the moss and the peat layer as well, then the effect of that fire will be kind of long-lasting with the long-term thawing of permafrost. Hope I answered your question. If not, feel free to type. So peat layer is, for us, we are kind of not vegetation people. We are more interested in thermal. So for us, any organic layer we kind of consider as, so peat is usually kind of dead stuff below the surface organic, which is moss is, I think, a good example of the organic layer that we are considering. And peat is kind of a partially decomposed moss layer. That's one way you can, yeah, dead moss is another way to say is that. That's what we consider peat. And for us, we just look at what is the thickness of that organic above the mineral soil. So at some point you will hit the mineral soil, which is kind of the real dirt. So for us, anything above the mineral soil we consider it as organic. And if it is it's a dead moss, then we assign different kind of properties. If it is live moss, then we assign a different kind of thermal properties. Hope that I answered your question.
So the thing is about this organic layer. So this peat layer is very porous media, and it is very good insulator during summer, which protects permafrost from warming impact of summer warm air. And if it burned out after fire, or people can just scratch it trying to use the land for different purposes, like build new infrastructure object there or use it for agriculture. It is the same situation when, like, you have a cooler filled with ice and frozen fish, for example, and the peat layer works as a lid of this cooler. If you remove it, you open your cooler, and soon ice will melt and fish will be rotten.
Okay, thank you. We'll turn this over to Alison now, and then we'll let you guys hang on there, and if any other questions come up, we'll pull you guys in at the end. I was going to ask Santos, can you guys turn off your webcam for a little bit so that Alison can be, since she's talking?
Okay, hi everybody. Like I said in the intro, my name is Alison. I work as an exhibit developer at the Oregon Museum of Science and Industry. So just a little bit of my background. I studied biology when I was in college. When I was a little kid, I was always outside running around, like catching snakes, rolling around in the dirt, and thought I wanted to be a scientist. But the more I grew up and got into what I really enjoy doing, I love learning about science, and I love getting to meet scientists and go out into the field with them. And but my skills and what I really like to do for my job is more communications focused. So, I love like doing videos and taking pictures and writing and putting together stories and telling those to people. And I feel really lucky because I found a job where I get to do all of those things. So what I do is I go learn about science and talk to scientists, and then I make exhibits. So the one that brought me into, sorry, I'm skipping forward. The experience that we're talking about now is one that's out touring. Right now it's in Florida, but you can go to our website, and if there are museums in your area who might want to book it, you can ask them to do that. And it's all about permafrost. And when I started working on the exhibit, I knew absolutely nothing about permafrost. I think I'd maybe heard of it, but I didn't have any clue what it is because I live in Portland and there's no permafrost here. So I think really the important thing for me that I learned about it is that I think, Santos, actually you were the person who told me this. We have this quote in the exhibit where you said that permafrost is the backbone of the Arctic. So basically, under a large portion of the Arctic, the ground doesn't freeze and thaw with the winter like it does in places in the lower 48. Below a certain level, it will stay frozen for the whole year. And most of it has been that way since the Ice Age. So that's why when you hear stories about like woolly mammoth carcasses like falling out of the ground in Alaska, they're coming from permafrost. They've literally been frozen underground since the last Ice Age. And it really holds up everything in the Arctic. So, if you build a structure on permafrost and the permafrost below your house thaws out, your house is going to fall into a big sinkhole in the ground. And then what Santos and Sasha were just talking about, when the permafrost underneath the forest thaws, it really changes everything about that environment. And so they shared some of that, and I'll give you some visuals a little bit farther on. But I really, working on this exhibit, it really just piqued my interest about permafrost, and so it was great to get the chance to go out and actually work with them in the field and see it for myself. And I wanted to show this picture also on the bottom left. There's Sasha. I didn't really know him at the time, but I visited Fairbanks and was taking pictures of researchers, and he made it into the exhibit. So anyway, that was, I think, the first time we met. Okay, so the first thing that I knew in my head about Alaska but hadn't really hit home for me is just how remote a lot of these places are, and Nikolai and Telida are that way. In large part because if you build a road on permafrost, you can imagine with like the sun warming the asphalt, it thaws out the ground below it. So roads in Alaska, if they're built on permafrost, are either impossible or very expensive to maintain. And it's really spread out. There's so much room in Alaska. So really the only way to get to a lot of these villages is by airplane or by boats up a river, or you could take snowmobiles or snow machines across the land when it's frozen. So we took an airplane, and you can see we flew out of a little airstrip, which at the top you load all of your gear onto those pallets, and they load those into the plane for you ahead of time. I think that was 1 or 2 days before we got on the plane. And I wanted to show a picture of the landscape from above because it's just absolutely breathtaking. And the small plane at the bottom there, that's how a lot of supplies get into Nikolai. Supplies in the village are super expensive because they have to be flown in. So below, I wanted to just give a tour of what the village looks like. So this is kind of the main area, kind of in the center of town. So I think Santos or Sasha mentioned the chief who is involved with the project. So that's him. His name is Stephen Nikolai Sr., and he's the top there on the top left, and he's standing on the airstrip. So that's kind of your first welcome when you get to the village. In the middle there, that's kind of the main road leading up to the church, and the community has a really gorgeous Russian Orthodox church in town. So you can see the interior of that there on the top right. And then at the bottom left, that's the tribal office. So we were staying in a building similar to that across the street from it. And you know, my first impression there is really, it's just everyone's really friendly. People are constantly coming and going on the roads, either on four-wheelers or on bicycles. And it's easy to get into conversations because everyone waves at you and you just stop and chat. So I had a great time while I was there. Okay, and then on this next slide here, this is just a look at what the landscape looks like. It's really beautiful. You can see Mount Denali in the background. That lake that you can see, Salmonberry Lake, is always super pretty. And we had a field site right next to it, so it was great to get to go visit that often. And then you heard Sasha and Santos talking about the forest types. So when you can see these kind of scraggly pine trees, they look almost like out of a Dr. Seuss book. So those are called black spruce, and they're quite hardy. So they do well on permafrost, and that's actually a good indicator that permafrost is there. It's not. Am I drawing on it? Oh no, you are. Yeah, so you can look around, and when you see those kind of open stands of black spruce, it's a pretty good indication that permafrost is underneath. When it starts to thaw out, you can see on the bottom right-hand side, first it gets really swampy, so there's a lot of water because the ice underground is thawing and it's turning into water. And since there's still ice below it, it gets contained, and so it turns into lakes or marshes. You get a really wet landscape, even though permafrost is typically pretty wet. But then as it thaws deeper and deeper and deeper, it's basically like opening up the drain in your bathtub because there's no ice underneath it, and it all just drains right out the bottom. So you get a super dry landscape. And you start to see deciduous trees like the birch. Okay, going to the next slide. I knew a lot about permafrost just from working on an exhibit about it, but I'd never really gotten to like mess around in it, and it just has the most incredible texture. It's super spongy, and there's what you heard Sasha and Santos talking about, that active layer, which is what freezes and thaws every year. So below that, it's completely frozen all year round. In the active layer, it will freeze and thaw. And it has all these really interesting plants and mosses and lichens, and it's like soft and spongy and wet, and you can like kind of just like, you can just shove your whole arm down into it until you hit the ice. And it, I don't know, it just has a texture to it that I've never really seen anywhere else. So when you're walking on it, your boots kind of sink into it. It's pretty cool. The downside is there are a bazillion mosquitoes everywhere you go because they like the moisture. So when you get into these areas with really healthy permafrost, the mosquitoes are just almost unbearable. There's so many of them. And they weren't even that bad comparatively when we were out there, but they're everywhere. So on the top right there, you can see that's Santos probing for permafrost. So you have basically a big metal rod with markings, or maybe it didn't have markings, but you basically just shove it into the ground until you can't go any farther, and that's when you hit the ice. And then you'll measure how much of it sticks up above the ground, and that's how you can tell how deep the frozen part is. So we would do that at every location just to find out how deep the frozen layer of permafrost is. Yeah, and then you can see Sasha sitting down at one of the field sites. So here in the next slide, so that's Vicki and her daughter Telida on the four-wheeler down there. That's how we got to most of our field sites. She was great, and Talida's like one of the cutest kids I've ever seen. Okay, so in this slide, Santos is walking a transect. So you draw 3 parallel straight lines, and you walk down them. And what he has a yardstick sticking out to his side, and then every tree that it hits as you walk along that line, you count that in your notebook. And it's a way of measuring how many trees are in an area, so you can compare that to, you know, some places there are a lot of trees, and some places there aren't very many. And it's a way of getting data out of it, so you don't go out there and you say, oh yeah, it looks like there's a lot of trees. You actually have a count of how many trees there were on your transect. So in the open areas, it's pretty easy to get across the transect, but you can see in this picture, sometimes it gets kind of hairy. There's a lot of ducking around branches. In the next slide, this is Sasha doing tree coring. So with tree cores, you can see how much trees grew in a year. So the bigger the tree ring is that a tree grows in a year, the more it's grown in that year. And so with those tree cord samples, you can say, okay, you know, in this year when permafrost was doing this, or permafrost temperatures were doing this, the trees were growing this much. And so that's how you get that. And Sasha rigged up a handy contraption there where you pull out the tree cores and then you record what they are on a piece of cardboard, and then you basically squish it together like an accordion and wrap duct tape around it, and then you can carry it out of the field without your things getting lost or broken. I thought that was tricky. In the next slide, this is one of the, or 2 of the sensors. So there are probes down into the ground with thermometers on them, so they record ground temperature, and you can leave them for a long time. Most of the ones that we checked had been checked 6 months before, but one in a marshy area was covered in snow when they were there last and they couldn't find it, so that one had been a year since anybody had checked it. And you can plug your computer in, and assuming wildlife hasn't gotten into it, you can download it onto your computer, and you see Sasha's actually looking at the data right there in the field, which is pretty cool. So just to hit home again why all this matters, permafrost, like I said, it's the backbone of everything in this, well, not every, okay, sporadic. 40% of the land around Nikolai is underlain with permafrost, so it's really important for keeping the natural systems around the community healthy, and this relates to human health. So the people who live in Nikolai, their parents and grandparents and great-great-grandparents back for generations upon generations have lived on this land and have systems in place to live pretty well there in terms of subsistence resources. So like I said, it's really expensive to get supplies into the village. So when you go into a store like the one you see on the bottom there, supplies are really expensive, like a lot more than we're used to. And that paired with the fact that there aren't many job opportunities to bring in cash in the village means that you really need to rely on traditional means of getting food. And there is a lot of food around. So Stephanie there in the center took us out cranberry picking, and there are big patches all around the village that you can go, and there are different seasons for different berries. But berries rely on permafrost and the forests that are supported by permafrost. And the contraption that you see in the river there, it's called a fish wheel. I'd never seen one until I started visiting Alaska. But the current spins it in big arcs, and as it does, it scoops up fish. And so there you can see some fish that were pulled out of the river. And so waterways rely on healthy permafrost, and so that's affected. So with the data that Sasha and Santos are pulling out, seeing that permafrost is really endangered, this is concerning for food resources since these all rely on permafrost. Okay, for my final conclusion though, I want to talk about why this matters to us. So permafrost is pretty far away. This is the view of what it looks like when it starts to thaw out. You get these collections of water. And it matters for our global climate. So there's a lot of plants and animal remains frozen into the permafrost that's been there, like I said, since the Ice Age, and there's a lot of permafrost in the world. Once it starts to thaw, it's basically like pulling food out of your freezer. It starts to decay, and when the microbes start decaying stuff that's been stored underground, they release heat-trapping gases, like the ones that come out of our cars when we drive them. So carbon dioxide and methane. And those go into the atmosphere, and they work with all the other heat-trapping gases basically to act like a blanket wrapped around the Earth that's holding in our heat. So permafrost is being thawed because of climate change, and as it thaws, it makes climate change worse. So really, we should all be concerned about permafrost thaw. But the point I want to make about this is that while I was up there, I was expecting to talk with the community most about what's happening to them. You know, I went there to learn what's happening to them. But we mostly talked about what's happening to me, because while I was there, it was fire season down in the Pacific Northwest, and all my friends and family were blanketed with smoke. And since there are so many people who are firefighters in Nikolai, they were invested in that. And so most of the time when we talked about climate change, we talked about fires and the fires that were happening in my community. And it was sad, but it was also like really cool and empowering, you know? It's like climate change is a really big, depressing issue. And the solutions to it that we're going to find need to involve a bunch of people coming together and working out, you know, how are we going to change transportation systems so that we release fewer fossil fuels? How are we going to do this and that? And all those things are so much better, like they're less depressing, and you can do more when you work with groups of people. So I think as a science educator, when I talk about talking about climate change, talk about what's happening in your home and find other people where different things are happening to them, and then come together and say like, okay, you know, what can we do about it? I think working with other people is just really cool. And so I guess that's like my big thing is let's all talk to each other about climate change and reach out to other people. Most people don't talk about climate change that much, and I think that just finding each other and comparing notes is something that's really powerful. So yeah, that was my experience in Alaska.
Awesome, Alison. Thank you for kind of bringing it all together. And I think the last question here that just came up is really appropriate because it just speaks to what you were just talking about. Annie's students want to know if global warming is reversible. And maybe we can have Santos and Sasha turn your webcams back on and join us. All right, so I'll let you guys talk about this. Students want to know if global warming is reversible.
That's actually a very important and very interesting question, because before answer this question, we have to answer what is the real driver of the climate change. What is the ratio of human activity and natural trends which causes climate change? mostly caused by human activity, technically speaking, yes. If it is like break even, like half and half, probably no. But so because we are permafrost scientists, I can tell you that in many places we kind of already stepped over the threshold, and in many places permafrost degradation became irreversible for a while until it will be really huge changes in climate.
Yes, and this is Santos. My take is along the same line with Sasha. So you have humans are actually releasing a lot of, through our living, we are actually releasing a lot of greenhouse gases, CO2 and other gases that can trap heat. But also being a geologist, we also study about long-term climate cycles. That's a 20,000-year cycle, 40,000-year cycle. I'm talking about Milankovitch cycle. You can look it up about Milankovitch climate cycle. And if you talk to a geologist, then we are right now in a interglacial time period. What it means, geologically a warm period. And every interglacial period was actually is a sandwich between glacial periods. So geologically, in the past, we have this interglacial and glacial, so theoretically, there should come a glacial period in the future if you look at, if you just believe the past geology. But at the same time, if humans and our land use and our use of technology is the main driver of this global warming, then the things that we do at home, the things that we do at the workplace, can actually help slow down the global warming or even kind of reverse it at some point.
Yeah, if it's mostly affected by human, it is more political or economical question than scientific. So we consume too much, we probably have to reduce our consumption level. Maybe it will help to protect climate, but you cannot just reduce consumption in one area, so it should be like global-wise.
I'll also just chime in that while we're seeing already a lot of effects from climate change that aren't reversible, we can do a lot to prevent massive change.
Okay, that's a good point. Let's see, there was another question that came up. The students are also wondering which of the tools you used in the field helped you the most.
Well, it's very difficult to say what is most useful. Shovel, sensors, this increment borer for tree sampling, even just measuring tape. So we use different tools for different purposes, and it's very difficult to select which.
Yeah, so it's like in a toolbox. In a toolbox, you have many different tools, and each tool has a purpose. So similarly, we use a variety of different tools, and each has a specific purpose, gives us a specific answer or number. And then if you want me to still pick one, then I would say temperature sensors are actually the most reliable tool that can tell you whether there is permafrost or not.
At the same time, most used tool was the measuring tape. And what is more important, it is not a tool, but the key thing to do studies in such remote area is a good relationship with local people. So we couldn't do anything there without this collaboration, without support and without help.
That's a good point because this involved the community. Okay, let's see. We're looking to see if there's any more questions or comments. People are thinking here. I just wanted to say thank you, Alison and team, for presenting today. Very interesting information. I know, Alison, earlier you mentioned about the traveling exhibit, about the Permafrost traveling exhibit, and that people can go to your website and learn more about that and how, if it's coming to their area and or if they want it to come to their area in the future. And let me see. Yeah. So I have a question for the research team. Are you planning on going back? Do you have any upcoming meetings or presentations with the community?
Talking about these communities?
Yes.
So yeah, we plan one more trip sometimes at the beginning of June to Nikolai and Telida, and also as a part of this project we also work with the community of Kotzebue. Yes, I also have plans to visit Kotzebue at least one more time. And as I told, I'm thinking about more research proposals for this area. We could use this community-based observation network we established for this project as a really good infrastructure background for many other.
Okay, great, thanks. All right, it doesn't look like there's any more questions, so we're going to wrap it up. We just want to thank everybody for joining us today, and like I started this event, we will be sharing the archive of it online and send it out to everyone that registered. So if you had to bug out early or you want to use it later on, you're welcome to do so. And again, thank you to Alison and Sasha and Santos for joining us today. It was very nice to hear about your work, and looking forward to following your work in the future with these communities. Looks really interesting. And if you guys want to talk, you'll have to unmute yourself.